Going on inside the Beltway. Now the latest salvo against the president. The New York Times reporting tonight that fired FBI Director James Comey claims President Trump asked him to shut down the investigation into Michael Flynn. Good evening, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum, and this is the story. The White House pushed back immediately, saying this. While the president has repeatedly expressed his view that General Flynn is a decent man who served and protected our country, the president has never asked Mr. Comey or anyone else to end any investigation, including any investigation involving General Flynn. The president has the utmost respect for our law enforcement agencies and all investigations. This is not a truthful or accurate portrayal of the conversation between the president and Mr. Comey. That is the end of the statement from the White House as we wait for more. No doubt this will renew the questions about whether there is indeed a taping system inside the White House that could back up either side of this story. If the story is true, did James Comey report it to his bosses at the Department of Justice after he had that conversation with the president? A lot of questions tonight. While the White House desperately tries to move off this story and the one from yesterday and on to the president's oncoming trip abroad, this has proven to be next to impossible in this current environment. So on Capitol Hill, before this news broke, this was what was said by Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
I think we could do with a little less drama from the White House on a lot of things so that we can focus on our agenda.
So that was even earlier tonight. He said that. We have a huge lineup for you on this quickly moving story tonight. Senate Select Intelligence Committee member James Risch is with us, plus former senior advisor to President George W. Bush, Karl Rove, is here, and House Judiciary Committee member Trey Gowdy will join us moments away with all of their reaction to this. Mr. Comey to drop the Flynn probe. The president is promising a speedy search for a new FBI director. No announcements so far for Jim Comey's old job. My next guest removed himself from the White House shortlist, saying that he doesn't believe he's the right man for that job. Congressman Trey Gowdy of the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees joins us now. Good to see you this evening, Congressman Gowdy. Thank you for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
Want to get your thoughts on this breaking news first, and then we'll get to some of that. What's your reaction to this story in the Times?
Well, I've been in a classified skiff with Director Pompeo for the last 2 hours, Martha, so I'm catching up a little bit. I read the story. Obviously, I want to see the memo. Obviously, I want to talk to Director Comey to determine how contemporaneous his recording of the conversation was, but also importantly, not just what was said, but what did Director Comey hear? How did he take it? And that can only be done, with all due respect to the New York Times, that can only be done by looking at the memo and talking to Director Comey.
Yeah, the New York Times in this report does not have the memo in their hands. It was read to them over the phone. So that in and of itself, you know, as you point out, it's very difficult to get the context if you can't read the whole thing.
Well, if you go back to criminal procedure, which is my background, there's a doctrine called the rule of completeness. Whenever part of a document is introduced, you got to be able to look at the entire document. Your viewers and my fellow citizens deserve to see the entire context of whatever conversation may or may not have taken place. And quite frankly, Director Comey deserves an opportunity to come tell us how he heard it, what he heard, how pervasive it was, and how much of the conversation that segment consumed. So we have a story. There's a reason newspaper articles are not admissible in any courtroom in the United States. I'm not knocking the reporter. The reporter does good work. But we're a long ways from a conviction, the fact that we simply have a headline in the New York Times.
So in terms of the, calls for a special prosecutor, an independent prosecutor, this is going to only fuel those. Do you think there's any reason to go that route at this point?
I have been resistant in the past, but I've been open-minded. Special counsel is only appropriate if there's an allegation of a crime, and there are several crimes potentially at play here. The hacking of the DNC is a crime. I don't hear people talking about that much. The dissemination of classified information is a crime. General Flynn's comments to the FBI may or may not constitute a false statement to a law enforcement official, and I've heard allegations that this rises to the level of obstruction of justice. So you do have a sufficient evidentiary basis for a crime, but the other half The other half of the equation is whether or not the Department of Justice or any of the 94 U.S. attorneys can do the job themselves. And I have not been persuaded that all 94 U.S. attorneys in our country, many of whom are women and men who have nothing to do with politics, are incapable of fairly adjudicating this fact pattern.
All right, one last question on this, then I want to get to the next subject with you. If James Comey believed that what the president said to him was an effort to obstruct justice, you know, to get him to table this investigation of Mike Flynn, would he be obligated to let the Department of Justice know right away?
I don't think so. I'm probably in a minority here. I don't think Director Comey reported President Obama the 4 different times he prejudged the outcome of an investigation. And there were 4 different times. Director Comey has not been afraid in the past to say no to presidents and attorney generals. He did it when he was with the Department of Justice. I think if he felt like this was an effort to influence him, he knows exactly what to do. But I won't know that until I have a chance to ask him.
All right. One thing we're left with still in all of this is an empty seat at the head of the FBI, and your name was on that short list. You asked for it to be taken off. Why? Why do you think you're not the right person for that job?
I think the country can do better than me, quite frankly. I did have 20 years in a courtroom, Martha. That's the best job I've ever had. But the reality is, in this current political environment, I am known more for being asked to chair one committee than I am the 20 years I spent in a courtroom. And my first rule of friendship is don't ask friends to do things that are not in their best interest. And the Senate confirmation process would be dreadful and it'd be miserable. And quite frankly, I think the country deserves a woman or a man who is devoid of political taint. And whether I like it or not, whether I wish I could wash it off or not, I have been in politics for 6 years. I think I could be fair, but I don't know that I could get the job, and I don't know that I could convince a sufficient number of my fellow citizens that I would be fair, and quite frankly, they deserve an FBI director that is above reproach.
We're just learning that Jason Chaffetz is saying, the congressman is saying that he has a subpoena pen hanging over this memo, and he would like to see it. Any reaction to that?
I don't know that he would have to subpoena it. I thought he was recuperating from surgery. I'm glad he's doing better. And he found a subpoena pen. I don't know that you would need to subpoena this memo. If it was read to the New York Times, I would certainly hope the FBI would read it to members of Congress. So hopefully it doesn't come to that.
I want to go back a little further in the Jim Comey story. You put out a statement when he was fired saying that he had a very tough job and access to the facts that perhaps the rest of us did not, is the way that you put it. You know, a lot of people have said that his performance on July 5th, when he came out and said, you know, we have all this evidence, extreme carelessness on the part of Hillary Clinton, and yet we are not going to prosecute her. Was that news conference enough in and of itself to let him go, do you think?
7, 6, 5, 4.
No, and I think when history knows the full fact pattern that led Director Comey to have that July news conference, I mean, I think what your viewers know is a meeting on the tarmac between the spouse of a suspect, of the suspect or the target of an investigation, and the Attorney General. What your viewers don't know, Martha, and what Jim Comey frankly can't tell them because it's classified, and I can't tell them because it's classified, there were a lot of other reasons that Jim Comey decided to take that decision upon himself. And I think history, and I've had plenty of differences with Jim Comey, I want to be really clear about that, lots of them. But I think history is going to be much kinder to Jim Comey in that July press conference than the Democrats were when he had it. I think he had access to information that, because he is a stand-up guy and he's not going to disseminate classified information, although God knows everybody else is, he's not going to do it even if it casts him in a negative light. So all your viewers see is this meeting on the tarmac. Jim Comey had access to additional information that I am convinced left him with no other choice than to make the decision he made in July.
So you're saying he had no choice? There was pressure on him to not prosecute Hillary Clinton? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I think he had access to information and he wanted to safeguard the integrity of the investigation and the integrity of the process. And I probably ought to just leave it right there. But no, I'm not talking about pressure. I don't think the guy feels pressure. I think he wanted the public to have confidence in the investigation and the outcome. Even though I disagreed with the outcome, he wanted you to have confidence in the process. He had access to information that your viewers don't have, and they may not ever have because it is classified. But trust me when I tell you this, Martha, I know what it was. And I have been a critic of Jim Comey in the past. But he made the only decision he could have made with respect to appropriating that decision away from the Department of Justice and making the decision himself. And history will be a hell of a lot kinder to him than the Democrats were at the time.
I only take away from that you're suggesting that there were more entanglements between the Clintons and perhaps the Justice Department than everyone understands.
You're very perceptive.
Okay. Thank you. Trey Gowdy.
Yes, ma'am.
Always good to see you, sir. We'll dig for more on that later. Good to see you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so here now with more tonight, Bill Bennett is the host of the Bill Bennett podcast, former education secretary and a Fox News contributor who helps us look at the big picture and gives us some historical perspective on what we are witnessing. It feels like there is a storm brewing all around that White House right now, and they just can't get out from under it. Bill, what's your take?
Yeah, there is a storm brewing. It's not a storm raging over the entire country. By the way, this is what's wrong with that storm in Washington, Martha, that a guy of Trey Gowdy's caliber could say, I won't go through the confirmation process. It would be dreadful.
Yeah.
That's a first-rate man that he doesn't want to do it. Tells you something right there. The other thing is I've been in North Carolina the last few days. Not a single random person has come up to me and said, my gosh, let's get to the bottom of this. What they've said is, can we get down to business? Can we get back to doing what the president said he was going to do? Storm is brewing in Washington. A lot of us are interested in it. Watch Fox all day long. A lot of people are thinking that the president has already lost this round because he's not about the business that he promised to be about. Senator Risch, let's all move to Idaho. What a great, sensible guy he is. Says, look, we are about it. We're doing it. But, you know, with tax cuts, health care reform, defeating ISIS, these things are all taking a back seat. Now, I want to say something about my former student, Charles Schumer, or at least I graded his senior paper.
Did he get a good grade?
Because he thought I graded it. He not as good as he thought he deserved. He got a great grade. He graduated magna cum laude, but for little Chucky, that wasn't good enough. He wanted to be summa, and we argued about it for about 3 hours. But I would have taken him down even further if I'd known he'd make a fundamental historical mistake like he did today. He said in his lugubrious and sententious way, the country is being tested in unprecedented ways. What the heck is he talking about? The Civil War? The Great War? World War II? The war to end all? Nonsense. Look. We'll find out answers to some of these questions when Comey testifies. But it seems to me, just do a thought experiment. If the president was talking to the president of China, which he was at Mar-a-Lago, and they were talking about North Korea, and the president says, you really got to do something to constrain these guys, and the president of China says, well, why? Could President Trump say, well, we have intelligence that they are developing missiles that could be long range and come to the United States? Oops, I can't tell you that, Mr. President, because it's confidential information. Of course he should share that information. Chinese probably know it anyway. But the point is, as has been said by several people today, these kinds of exchanges take place all the time. Did it do harm? Did it do damage? We have no evidence. We have no evidence that it did. The Israelis certainly aren't upset about it. And showed their full confidence in the United States. So let's put it in perspective.
I hear what you're saying, but there is an argument to be made that in some of these cases, the White House is sort of handing their opposition quite a bit of material to chew on, right? And that they're doing that on a daily basis. Let me just posit that if the president, for example, let's go back to the example from yesterday about the leaking information to Russian officials, if he had called up his director of national intelligence and said, you know what, when I have this conversation, I'm going to speak with them about this intelligence. I have the right to do that. I feel like if I bring them into the loop a little bit, we may get somewhere with them. And just sort of, dotted the I's and crossed the T's a little bit, had a little bit more organized approach, it would diffuse a fair amount of this, I think. But they seem to keep tripping over this stuff and causing themselves problems that allows them to not get to the agenda that you discuss.
He's impulsive. He doesn't follow regular order, if you will, for presidents. But is he trying to bring down the United States and hand the country over to Russia? Does anybody really believe that? Does any Democrat really believe that?
Some of them do.
Look, if you looked at Well, they say it, but maybe they do. Maybe you're right. Maybe they do. Maybe they are that deranged that they do. If you looked at Mother Teresa in a microscope, you would see germs and bacteria. Look at anybody that close, and you're going to see problems. You're going to see.
Are you comparing Donald Trump and Mother Teresa, just for the record, because that's what's
no.
That's what's going to get picked up on Twitter and everywhere else. Bill Bennett compares Mother Teresa to Donald Trump.
No, I'm not. But let me just say this on the leakers. The thing the president has to do is to clean house. He should have cleaned house day one. There are people probably in the White House, certainly in the departments, who are not loyal to him. When I got to the Department of Education, I fired almost everybody. And you know what? A lot of them were Republicans. They've been there serving Terrell Bell. They hadn't been serving a Democrat. But you got to have your own team. He's getting killed by these people who are leaking, who are disloyal to him, and he's got to get his own team of trusted people. And that's just non-negotiable. This is going to continue to haunt him until he gets those people whom he can trust and who will not betray him.
We've heard a lot about it, and I think a lot of them are going on the plane to Saudi Arabia and Rome and Jerusalem. So we'll see if those deck chairs get changed before that. Bill, thank you very much. Always good to hear from you, sir.
Find out who they are and leave them in Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. So joining us now, we'll go back to the White House. Chief White House correspondent back in front of the cameras on the lawn there, working this evening. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts. John, what do you know?
Good evening to you, Martha. I got free of my tether long enough to run into the comms office upstairs, and the people are behind closed doors, some of them. Others are waiting to get some more information. We should hear something a little bit later on tonight. Right now, they are in a mode where they are trying to put some pieces together here so that they can give us a little bit more accurate read on what the president actually said to the FBI director during that February Oval Office meeting. One person I talked to said that they had not talked to the president in recent hours. Another one had, but that was probably just before or shortly after this whole thing hit. So they're trying to put some information together, and they understand here at the White House that they are beginning to lose the narrative on this story. With Democrats on Capitol Hill in both the House and the Senate running around starting to shout obstruction of justice, obstruction of justice, they know that they've got a potential brush fire or something greater than that on their hands. And so they're trying to get some pieces of this together. The Rapid Reaction Force was a little delayed because of a meeting that was going on with the White House Correspondents Association. But they hope to get something. I'm sorry, my phone's ringing. I don't know who that is, but I'll answer it and say, I'll be with you in a moment, just in case this is one of my sources calling me back. Let me pitch it back to you, Martha. I'll get back to you if I hear something.
Just very quick question. Is there any more discussion about this taping system? Because we have people calling on Capitol Hill calling for the transcripts of these recordings. If there is indeed a taping system and the president wants to prove what he did not say, it would be pretty useful to have it right now.
The White House has not said anything to confirm or deny a taping system, only to say that the president said something about it, and that that's all he's going to say. And all the president said really was, Jim Comey, you better hope there aren't tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking things. But nothing to suggest there is or there isn't a taping system at this point, Martha.
That's going to be a pretty interesting piece of information when we get it. John, get on your phone and we'll see what happens.
Martha.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
So joining me now with more on this issue of leaks coming out of D.C., Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, a CIA-trained intelligence operative. Good to have you here this evening, Tony. So you listen to all of this. You read the New York Times story. What do you make of it?
Let me read you an excerpt. Neither NBC News nor the Times has seen the actual memo. Come on, this is news. Martha, think about what's going on here. And I heard John Roberts' report. There's a lot of questions which have to be answered clearly. But think about what the mainstream media has projected here, and I would almost say this is weaponized information. We have to understand that facts are facts, and everything should be laid out regarding actual memos. And think about why didn't that Comey associate just give a copy of that memo to the reporter? I think we'd all be a lot more comfortable about knowing what should come next. And this is something to me that the standards of reporting keep getting lowered and lowered in these anonymous sources and this, that, and the other. And part two of this is, as you mentioned in the introduction, is the leaks. We have an issue right now where yesterday the information which was provided to the Russians was probably sensitive, but now all of a sudden you guys were just talking about the fact we know the sourcing of it, that it came from a clandestine human intelligence source from the Israelis. we shouldn't be having this conversation. Somebody within the White House, with the support of the media, is actually doing things to not only damage this president, but damage the very ability of this country to protect sensitive sources and do the hard work of nation-state work. So this is beyond, in my judgment, and I heard Bob Bennett talk about there's been times when, you know, things could be worse and not worse. Look, this is bad by the fact that I feel you have elements of our own political system turning inward on a president who they don't like, but are not recognizing the long-term and significant damage they're doing to the ability of the government, of the White House, to do the work of protecting the United States.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, there is the question that I keep going back to is
Sure.
the underlying substance of any of these allegations. You know,
Right.
that there, and as Bill Bennett said, does anybody really think that, you know, this president is sort of in office in order to promote Russian expansionism?
Yeah.
Right? Because that would be their underlying desire, to sort of
Right.
incorporate someone who would help them to sort of fulfill their, you know, Soviet dreams of a bigger empire again. There
Right.
is no evidence that
None.
there is anything to suggest that, and yet what you've got is, you know, all these layers on top of this that keep allowing questions to arise.
Right.
But let me, you know, in terms of that conversation, because it is important what the president said to Jim Comey
No
and
doubt.
what Jim Comey said to him.
No
If
doubt.
he did say, you know, I hope you can let this go, is that obstruction of justice?
The question becomes, actually, what should Comey have done with a request like that? If I were the FBI director, I would want to do one of two things. Like, Mr. President, you should. This is an area that you know. I know you're new. This is not something a president should ask an FBI director and put it in those terms. There's no evidence that Comey did that. Secondly, if Comey was that worried about it, he should have made an immediate report to congressional oversight. Think about this. I mean, Martha, you and I have talked about this town, Washington. Nothing like that would stay unaddressed for this amount of time. You don't hold things like that back. There's been a number of occasions where that information, if it happened, Comey should have given that to one of the oversight committees, either House Judiciary, Senate Judiciary, and said, we have a problem.
Yeah.
You don't sit on something like that, because
the fact that somebody
that's
is, you
significant.
know, this is somebody who is an associate of Jim Comey's, according to this report, who read this memo. So I have to believe that that was with the cooperation of Jim Comey, saying, yeah, you know, I have no problem with you reading that memo to them because those are my notes. Now, would he be wanting to go down that road if the president hadn't, you know, sort of repeatedly attacked him after he fired him? Has he sort of upped the ante, and is Jim Comey feeling that he wants very much to get his side of the story out there because he feels like he got roughed up?
No, I don't see it this way. I see this as an attack. Look, if Jim Comey has something to say, he could call a press conference and lay out his case, or wait till he goes to a hearing. This is insidious. This is information warfare. This is death by 1,000 cuts. As John Roberts just said, the White House right now is under siege. It's under this constant attack by the media. So nobody's actually taking a step back, taking a deep breath, saying, do I really believe someone who says he read a memo that Jim Comey may or may not have written, may not have given. Think about you guys wouldn't run with something so flimsy.